but by the time we got to the middle of the book, there was a character that I was doing a particular voice for, and all of a sudden, I think I was doing like a very tough male, gruff voice. And then about middle of the chapter, it said, "She said," and I was like, "Oh no."
Hello, everyone, and welcome to One Story Building, where the storyteller's stories are stored in our brains for all time. And today's guest, well, what can I say? If George Lucas is the brains of Star Wars, and in my opinion, John Williams is the heart of Star Wars, then today's guest truly is the voice of Star Wars. Marc Thompson, welcome to One Story Building.
Oh, wow. Thank you. That's a huge compliment. Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
Oh, well, when I think of the voice of Star Wars, the voice that runs through the core of Star Wars and the Star Wars fandom, I think of you because you do all the voices, man. It's crazy. I can't think of a voice that you couldn't do. Is there any voice that you couldn't do?
I mean, I think it's debatable how well I do some of them, but I do my best. I give it the old college try.
Well, as much as I would love to immediately start about your Star Wars audiobook life, I have to talk about your beginnings as an actor and a voice actor. How did you start acting, and how did you transition into being a voiceover artist?
It was one of those things where at a pretty young age, I realized I wasn't super athletic. I wasn't like super academic. But I kind of found my niche with like the theater department and with choir and all that stuff. And so my parents and I had some great teachers that really kind of encouraged me to kind of keep up with that and try that out. So I did, school plays and speech and debate team and all that stuff, and decided I wanted to give it a try and pursue it. So I went to NYU to study theater. And when I got to the city, it was a pretty quick transition out of college, actually, because I'd done some musical theater and I've done plays and things like that. But then my sophomore year of college, there was an audition for a cartoon at MTV. And this was like in the old days. So this was like before the internet. And, like it was like a cork board with a piece of paper that, would just said, "Hey, if you want to audition for this, call this phone number." So I did, and I kind of just did this audition. It was for a vampire cartoon that didn't actually go into production. But then they said, "We like you and we want you to read for this other one." And that was this spin-off of this show, Beavis and Butthead, that was called DARIA.
Mm-hmm.
And that was like my first ever paid job as an actor and my first kind of big gig. And from there, it just kind of snowballed. And I kind of started getting a lot of work in voiceover.
You were the voice of Kevin Thompson from DARIA, and the reason why that just sticks out to me is because he was my favorite character, because he's too stupid to be a mean person. He's just so lovable. And I mean, with all voice actors, there's always that moment when I look into their work and I go, "That was him, that was her, that was you." Like it's just Kevin Thompson, Duke Devlin from Yu-gi-oh. I'm like, "That was you, the Star Wars audiobook guy." Was that you've just done it all, man? But of course, Star Wars audiobooks, and you've done like at least 50 of them. How did you eventually get the attention of Lucasfilm and do their audiobooks and work for them for so long?
Yeah. So I'd been doing voiceover for a while. And I had mostly, to that point, done animation. Like you mentioned, I did like Duke Devlin on Yu-gi-oh. I do and still do a bunch of the characters on Pokemon. I was on Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. And so I kind of done a lot of character work and specialized in that. So my agent called me one day and was like, "Well, hey, have you ever done audiobooks?" And I was kind of not very keen on the idea, because I was the kid in school where if you had to do a book report, I would rent the movie instead of reading the book. Like I was not a reader. It was not something I did for fun. And I was kind of trying to talk her out of it. So I was like, not really. I mean, I'm not sure if that's my thing.
Talk your agent out of getting you a job.
Yeah.
What a crazy thing for an actor to do.
I got to read a whole book. I was like, really? I was like, I didn't want to ever do that. So but then she was like, well, they're trying to audition someone for a Star Wars book. And I was like, whoa, hold on. Yes. Wait, I would love to do that. I would love to do that. And she was like, okay. So she sent me a couple of pages, and I worked harder on that audition than any audition up until that point. Like I was like really like I was going over it like crazy and really trying to get down the character voices, and I was praying about it, and I was like, please let me get this. So I go in, and oddly enough, the director of the audiobooks was named Kevin Thompson, which is a crazy coincidence. And he also directed a show on MTV at the same time that Daria was happening. And so we were like, amazed by that coincidence or whatever. So, but I went in and I did my audition, and I think I got hired because of my characters. And I was able to kind of, relatively well mimic some of the characters that were appearing in the book from the films. But I had never done an audiobook before. So Kevin really had to kind of coach me and help me, because this was like a 9-book series. Like, so it not only is my first book ever, but I have to do 9 of them right out of the gate. And he really had to help me, because I could do the character voices, but I wasn't such a great storyteller. Like I wasn't really making the prose and the narration connect to the listener. Like I was just kind of like, this is stage directions, this is scenery, okay, dialogue here, let me really focus on the dialogue. So
I
he
did
really
actually want to
that.
ask you about your because I think you've discussed before where when you were saying a character's dialogue, it was fairly easy for an actor because you just acted how they would say the line. But then it was like he walked down a hall, he did this happened. You just sort of stated it as if it were a fact. And what I've noticed in pretty much all of your audiobooks is that when there's like a fight scene going on and someone gets like punched in the gut, and the line is something like the wind got knocked out of him, you don't just say the wind got knocked out of him, you go like the wind got knocked out of him, and you have to sort of act the action out. So how quickly or not quickly did you learn how to perform the stage direction of the book?
Right. I guess you'd have to ask Kevin, but I feel like once he gave me that note, I kind of understood what he was saying, and I was able to kind of latch onto it. I just remember one day he was kind of explaining to me that you have to understand that any of those descriptions are usually from a character's point of view. So like when he says like the wind got knocked out of him, that's usually like, even though it's spoken in the third person and written in the third person, is describing events that are happening to that character. So I think that was his suggestion, and I kind of like latched onto that ever since. Not every that's not a universal rule of audiobooks. Like there are some directors and some narrators that feel like you shouldn't do that because they feel like it takes away from the like if you were reading, all that would be happening in the reader's imagination. So their approach to audiobooks is that you should read it almost flatly so that the listener gets the words, and then they can do a lot of that imagining in their head. But my opinion and Kevin's opinion is that if you're listening to it in the audio format, you want to make it engaging, and you want to make it like almost like a radio play. So that's kind of how we approach it. And I personally like that way of approaching audiobooks much more. And it helps me as a storyteller engage much more with the narration and with the kind of, exposition and things that normally I would get, bored with, honestly, as a kid in high school. Like I was like, how many paragraphs are there about this mountain? Like get me to the action. So
you don't want to do any audiobooks for Lord of the Rings because you're just going to be talking about trees and mountains for 4 hours.
Exactly. Exactly.
Kevin Thompson, you've been working with him for quite a while, and one question that I didn't actually write down, but I just want to ask: when I listened to the end credits of the audiobook, and you're like, this was a Lucasfilm production directed by Kevin Thompson. When you get to music by John Williams, you add so much gravitas to it. You go music by John Williams, and I'm thinking, does Kevin Thompson tell you to say it like that, or are you just so awestruck by his music? Because I could believe either one. Music by John Williams.
Right. It was a note from Kevin. Like it was
Mhm.
like, like let's put a little emphasis on that because, it
He's
is
great.
it is it's like what you said. He's the soul of Star Wars and his
Mhm.
music means so much and it enhances it. And I yeah, so that was all him. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
he gave it to me one time, and then over however many years, I just always do it now because I do feel that way about John Williams. So I,
Mm.
I kind of lean into it.
Those audiobooks, they are so lucky to have his music. They should
Oh,
be thanking God every single day that they get his soundtrack. A lot of prequel music in there, which is kind of surprising, but the music everywhere is good for him. So a recording session when you're working with Kevin and whoever else might be there, how is a recording session, a recording studio, how is that all set up and how does it operate from start to finish?
so I go into like a sound booth, and I'll have it used to be paper, which was annoying because you'd have to turn the pages very quietly because you could hear the rustling of the paper. But now we use iPads, and I'll have like an iPad on a stand, and they'll have the microphone set up, and basically you just start from the first page and you go as far as you can each day until you get to the last page. And there's definitely a lot of hiccups and mistakes and times I'm doing a line of dialogue in one character's voice and all of a sudden realize, oh wait, it's not that character, it's this character, and I have to kind of go back and do that. And we just let it roll, and then there's an editor that kind of takes out all my mistakes and all my flubs and all my retakes and kind of gets a clean version of it. And then uh, Kevin and Paul Goodrich, who has been doing this again for 10 or 15, 20 years now, will layer in once they get a clean edit of the story from start to finish, then they'll layer in the sound effects, the music and any kind of processing for droids or things like that, and then mix it all together. So but we're in the booth recording. Usually it takes me about 5 days from 10 until 6 at night. Like, so it's a good chunk of time.
I'm picking up what you may be suggesting that you don't actually read the books beforehand. Is that correct?
Oh, no, 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 no. I do read the book
Right.
beforehand. Yeah, yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
okay,
Yeah,
okay,
there's
okay.
I skipped a lot of I thought you just wanted the process in the booth, but like when I usually get the script about 2 weeks before, 2 or 3 weeks before we have to go in the booth.
Mhm.
And what I do then is I read it through, and anytime there's a character that speaks or has a line of dialogue, I make a note about that character and I'll write down like, are they human? Are they alien? Do they have a particular gender? Is the author describing their voice in a way like sometimes I'll describe them as melodic or rough, or so there's some quality to their voice I'll try to incorporate. And then after I've read the whole book and written down every single person that speaks, I go back and cast it. So like I'll think about like, okay, if this were a movie, like what actors or what type of actor would I want playing this role? And sometimes it's influenced also by how often is this character speaking? Who else is this character going to be speaking to? Because I want to make them as distinct as possible from each other. And then I record samples of what ideas of what I have on my phone, so that when I do get in the booth, and we get to a line of dialogue, I'll just maybe real quick listen to my idea of what I have in mind, and then kind of that, oh right, I'm doing this for that character, and then I can kind of go on. And usually around day 2 or day 3, I've known the main characters well enough where I don't have to keep listening every 2 seconds. And then sometimes Kevin will say, yeah, I like that, or no, let's try something different for this character, or let's switch this up, and then we try to come up with something there. But yes, it's a long process.
I must admit, I'm a little disappointed that you say that you read the books beforehand, because I just have
Oh,
this
really?
this image in my head of you performing the book. I mean, I don't say reading the book because that might be a little offensive to voice actors, because you're performing,
Mm,
you're not just reading a book. But when you read the
right.
book, I'd like to think that you don't know what's going to happen next. So when you're reading it and it's being recorded, you can just go, when you hit like a plot twist, it's like he walked down the hall and oh my god, and then they just cut that
Right,
out later.
right,
But
right.
you know what's going to
No,
happen.
there's no way
You
I
know
could
what the
do
plot
it.
twist.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I
Yeah,
mean,
I would need to know ahead of time.
you've just
There's
described
one
how.
time where we had such a tight timeline, and it was probably 10 years ago, but there was one time where I wasn't able to finish the book before we had to start recording, and it was a nightmare, and I was terrified the whole time I was reading. And sure enough, but by the time we got to the middle of the book, there was a character that I was doing a particular voice for, and all of a sudden, I think I was doing like a very tough male, gruff voice. And then about middle of the chapter, it said "she said," and I was like, "Oh no!" And like we had to go back and so I do not recommend going in cold. Like and plus you can't really tell the story if you don't know where the story's going, and so you want to. There's no way I could do that. Like there's no way I could go in cold like that. So,
and you don't want to pick a gruff voice for a character that you don't know may have more to say than you initially expect. But do you have any specific examples of character voices that were the trickiest to figure out?
Yeah, like I just got a new phone, so I don't have my old references on there. But I think there was a character in the new Thrawn trilogy. What was their name? It was not Wingali. It was the Magus. And it was like Timothy Zahn described it as kind of this like rough, kind of coarse whispering thing, and it was like trying but it was like a matriarch. It was like a this kind of maternal mother figure. So I had to somehow convey that it was a matriarch and kind of somewhat feminine, but also coarse and rough and hunting and all these things. And I think what we came up with was something along the lines of like it was like a croaking sound. It was like we will understand why Grand Admiral Thrawn is here. And it was like kind of this like I was trying to put it in the back of my throat and kind of guttural. And so that was it took a lot of different tests and playing around and experiments and things like that to try to come up with something that I thought was matching what he wanted it to sound like.
Well, now I have to ask, what is the most fun voice to voice?
Oh man, I mean there's so many that are fun for so many different reasons. I mean, I love doing Han just because I grew up on him, and Chewie, punch it, it's fun to do that stuff. And then Yoda is like my all-time favorite Star Wars character. So anytime I get to say, do or do not, there's no try. Music this is coming through my window. It's like super fun to do that just for nostalgia reasons. So, but I think generally speaking, I love doing aliens or creatures. Like anytime I get to do something that's really out there or just really crazy, I love the challenge of that, and it's a lot of fun.
I've noticed that your Yoda voice and your Obi-Wan voice are not only great impressions, they seem like great impressions of the voice from the Star Wars Clone Wars show more than the movies. Is that on purpose?
Maybe like I didn't consciously think that, but I think there was some of the stories I've gotten to tell were happening kind of in that era, and so I was maybe thinking of those voices, and they were and I'm a Clone Wars fan, so I've definitely watched those a lot and kind of have those in my mind. So there's more to draw from just in terms of amount of lines or amount of references from the Clone Wars than there are the films. Like it's actually wild how little they talk in the films when you actually break it down. So
I read somewhere on Facebook or something that Yoda says about 42 times in the entire trilogy, which I guess isn't that surprising because he's such a contemplative character. Yeah. A couple years ago, I was at work and I was told to me and my fellow colleagues were told to literally kind of move boxes from one room into another room for about 5 hours.
Okay.
So you know what I did?
Oof.
I put my earphones in and I listened to Star Wars Dark Disciple. And I tell you, I wish there were more boxes because I wanted to listen to it to it more. But when you're recording, do you ever think to yourself what the audience is going to be using this audiobook for? Are they going to be working? Are they going to be driving? Does that ever come into your mind when you're working?
Yeah, like, well, yeah, like because when especially when I first started, I was like, who has 8 hours or 10 hours to listen to something? Like, who's ever gonna hear this, But then, like, over the years, I've heard from people and heard like all kinds of amazing stories of, how people, um listen to them. And like sometimes it's like you said, like people listen to it while they're at work. I met like some truck drivers that said that those books like kind of helped keep them awake, like when they're driving these long hauls, and like it really helps them. I met a soldier who said that while he was in Afghanistan and kind of like in a foxhole, like to help him, like when he got off his shift, like it would help him like calm down and like have, like not, be, completely overwhelmed by the stress of the situation. So and then I've met people that are visually impaired that were able to like, enjoy the Star Wars books because they're in an audio format, and families that listen to it on long road trips for vacations. So it's really interesting, like, and then like runners and things like that. So it's kind of amazing how people are able to engage with it. Because I was at first I was like, there's no way someone could just listen to this for this many hours, but it's kind of amazing all the places that people find to do it.
So why do you think the Lucasfilm department has kept you on board to do their audiobooks for so long? Because I mean, I said before, you've done at least 50 and you've been doing it for well over a decade. Why do they keep bringing you back?
I don't really know. I mean, I think I'm very enthusiastic about doing them. like like you know, the Kevin will sometimes joke with me that like, I would pay him to do this. Like I enjoy it so much. And the other day he was like, if you won the lottery, you'd still come back to finish this, right? And I'd be like, yeah, of course. So like he I think part of it might be just that I just personally really love it so much. So for me, it's more than just another gig or another job. It's like I'm a big fan of it. So I kind of keep making it known that I would like to keep doing it. So and I just really enjoy it. So but yeah, I don't know. And I know there's definitely other narrators. Like I sometimes, as flattering as it is to hear you say like the voice of Star Wars, like I sometimes get a little nervous about that, because there are so many amazing narrators that are also doing these books, like Jonathan Davis is amazing, January Lavoie is amazing, Saskia Marleveld is great, and there's so many other narrators that also do these. But I've definitely been lucky. Like I've definitely been very, very lucky that I've gotten to do so many and for so long. And I'll keep doing them as long as they keep asking, because I really love it.
You mentioning those other audiobook narrators reminds me of the narrator for the Darth Plagueis Star Wars book, who was Daniel Davis, the butler from The Nanny. He did such a fantastic job at being Darth Plagueis. And you know what?
Yeah.
No offense, I don't want you or anyone doing Darth. I don't want anyone to do Darth Plagueis's voice, because he is he's such a he is that character. He is that voice. You're great, but don't do it, please.
No, okay,
yeah. It's
I won't.
if it's not broken, don't fix it.
Yeah.
Actually, you know what? Since you're here, since I got you, I mean, if you know who Darth Plagueis is, how would you go through the process of figuring out how to do that voice? Because
now I
remember,
would go listen to John.
remember, he is immune, and if you remember from Star Wars Attack of the Clones, the Mune in On Geonosis was that tall, skinny-headed guy who said the
Yes.
banking
Yes,
plan
yes,
will
yes.
sign your treaty. Not that Daniel Davis did that kind of voice, because his was like, "Ah,
Right, right,
Sidious,
right.
I am the Lord of the Sith," and yeah. So yeah, but yeah, how would you go about doing a Plagueis
Oh
voice?
man. I would definitely have to I wouldn't dare want to try without researching it a little bit. Like
Mhm.
I probably would listen to the Clone Wars episodes um knowing that he's immune.
Mhm.
And then I knowing and just knowing what how revered that narration is. Like if I ever got to do a book where Plagueis appeared, I would definitely listen to that audio book or a chapter or two at least and try to like get somewhere in the ballpark of how he did it, because I know you're not alone. Like I know a lot of people love that
Mhm.
production, and it was I know he's an amazing actor. So
Mm. I'd say Star Wars Dark Disciple, the Matthew Stover Revenge of the Sith
oh, I've
novelization,
heard that. Yeah,
and
yeah, yeah.
Dark Disciple, Revenge of the Sith, and Darth Plagueis. That's my trifecta of like the
Wow,
three best Star Wars
that's
books,
awesome.
and they're all audiobook narrated by different people, so it's not like
Yeah,
it's not unbalanced. So
no, totally.
when one of my favorite you know what? I think the first time I ever heard you was, well, aside from Kevin and Duke Devlin in audiobook form. The first time I heard you in audiobook form was when I was on a very long plane flight and I was listening to Revan, Star Wars Revan, and I just
Oh
fell
yeah.
in love with the relationship between Scourge and Setchel, because they had such different voices. Because Scourge was like, I must see the Emperor immediately," and Setchel was like, "Yeah." It was such a contrast. But when you're doing dialogue between characters like that, how much space in between each voice are you given to just reset yourself and get back into the mood of being each character back and forth?
I mean, I suppose it's as much space as I want or need, because again, they'll like afterwards they're going to edit it and they're going to
Mm-hmm.
kind of shrink everything down or whatever. So I can take as much time as I need. I try to make it though as tight and conversational as possible, because then it's actually easier for me to stay kind of in the scene and have the conversation make sense if I'm doing it in the natural cadence or tempo that they would be if they were two people in a room. If I get too um, far apart from each line, sometimes I lose the thread of the conversation, if that makes sense. And sometimes that happens with me anyway, because I get a little obsessive about wanting to get the perfect line reading. And sometimes I'll do like 3 or 4 takes in a row of a particular line. And then I get so obsessed with that moment that I lose the overall conversation. So sometimes I have to kind of, I try to kind of keep it at the pace that you would if you were watching it as a play happening. But I'm obviously not perfect and can flub and make mistakes all the time. So I don't know how often that actually happens, but that's the goal.
How often have you listened to your own narration, your own audiobooks?
I've never listened to a full one.
Mm.
I like anytime I'm doing a book that's a part of a series, I will often go back and listen to snippets of the previous book in order to remind myself of the character voices and get updated references. Because sometimes what I record on my phone is the sample and the idea changes as I'm recording the book. So then I want to go back to how it was in the book to make sure it's consistent in the next book. So then sometimes I'll listen to it for little sections of scenes. And that's always impressive because I feel like the music and the sound effects add so much
Mm-hmm.
where I'm like, I kind of like will sometimes like listen past what I need to listen to because I get so sucked in by the music, the effects, and because
Mm-hmm.
then it feels like a totally, it doesn't feel like me anymore. It feels like, oh wow, what's going on? So like there's it's enhanced so much when they do all that. So
Yeah.
it's pretty cool.
Oh,
But I live in New York, so I don't drive, and I don't have very. I've listened to other narrators' audiobooks all the way through, but I just by the time I've recorded it, I've read the book twice through, and I
sick of it.
don't have the patience to sit
Yeah.
through it. So.
Yeah, when this has happened several times, when I listen to a sweet moment that you're telling in a book, when you're narrating it, and Across the Stars from Attack of the Clones comes in, oh, I just have to like pull over and have a bit of a cry. It's so pretty. Again, they're so lucky to have his music. They're so lucky. But
you
I'd
don't know.
say,
Yeah.
legally speaking, in what capacity do you own these voices? Like if someone just on the street came up to you and said, "Hey, do this voice," could you do it? If someone wanted you to do like a similar voice, like I want you to do your Thrawn voice for this other thing that isn't Star Wars, could you just do it?
It's definitely a tricky question. I mean, I think I would say yes and no. Like I think, obviously if you're doing a Star Wars character, like Lucasfilm owns the rights to those characters. But since it's my characterization, like my, like, and this is the problem with any voice actor is, you know, I'll be watching a commercial sometimes and I'll be like, oh, that's so and so. He does the voice of da 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 da, and like I'll know that like that voice they're using in the Gummy Bears cartoon is the same voice for this Hyundai commercial or whatever, and so is it the gummy bear voice or is it like that actor and like that actor's sensibility and that actor's instrument, so like I think there's some crossover, but I don't think I could get away with doing like a Yoda for anything. Like I think that's like pretty
Yeah.
clear, whose voice I'm doing or what.
Oh,
But even like one of my really good friends hates Yoda because he feels like it's just Grover. That's Grover from
yeah.
Sesame Street. So
When I found out that Frank Oz was Yoda, I can't help but hear a little bit of Miss Piggy just sort of croak its way out of Yoda's face. So, well,
Exactly.
that brings me to the last question, which I always ask at the end of these things, and that is, why are stories important?
Ooh, wow, that's deep. Well, we were chatting a little bit before we started recording, and you mentioned this idea that you know the idea you had for this podcast is that all stories ultimately are inspirational, and that resonates with me, and I think that's why stories are important. Is um I think stories can teach us things about life and about ourselves in a much deeper way than if I were to just tell you the lesson. Like if I were to just say, you know, don't steal, I could just say don't steal. But if I told you a story about, someone who was greedy and someone who, and took something that wasn't theirs, but then the consequences they suffered because of that and the people they hurt, and you're going to learn that lesson in a much deeper way, in a much more personal way than you would if I said just don't steal, or if I told you that like love is the most important thing in life. I could tell you that, or I could tell you a story, make you fall in love with a character, show them falling in love with someone, and show the lengths that they're willing to go to, the sacrifices they're willing to make, how these other things don't fulfill them, and it will stick with you, and it'll be with you much longer in a much deeper way than anything else, and I think the power they give us to imagine things, the power they give us to see what could be and kind of what should be as opposed to maybe what is very powerful and important. The power they have to make us empathize with someone that's not in our situation, and maybe kind of see the world through a different point of view. Like they have all this power to do that, and I definitely think they're essential. And as I know I was kind of joking before about how in school I didn't like to read, and I was like, oh, I don't want to read a book. But like over the past, however long I've been doing this, I've come to like love reading. Like I see like, oh wow, this is why people like this, because it's like you when you spend that long with a character, you know them in a much deeper way than you would a 1 hour TV episode or a 2 hour film. Like when you spend 8, 10, 12 hours with characters and going through stuff and hearing their inner thoughts and reading their inner monologue and knowing like not just their actions but what's motivating those actions, it opens you up to all these different things. And now I'm kind of like, oh, this is why people like reading. So
Yeah, I never really got into reading until I picked up Star Wars Revan, which you eventually did the narration
oh
from. So
wow.
that I mean, I read it when I was like 19. When I was in
Uh-huh.
school, I really hated reading because I just found it boring because I was told what to read. And then when I left and I got to choose whatever
Yes.
I wanted, I got to do whatever I want, and
Right.
it was more fun.
Yeah, totally.
But Mr. Mark Thompson, thank you so much for coming on to One Story Building.
Oh yeah, I really appreciate you having me on. This was a lot of fun. Thanks, Cody.